So the way that we're going to do this is the first week we are going to take, let me just grab the fabric panel, let me show you that as well. First week we are going to take the fabric panel and we are going to go through one of these panels. So we're going to do the one that's here, the one with the little kind of almost like little Christmas trees, little sad after Christmas trees. We're going to do those and the little bullion butterflies as well. So we'll hopefully complete one side, and then the other side you'll be doing as homework. Next week we'll go through this one here, which will allow you to do your kind of spider's web wheel stitches, and that will also allow you to finish off the lid, which is over here, and a very similar pattern to it. Okay. So that's week number 2, and then week number 3 we're going to kind of compose this all into a box. Now, any slightly more experienced sewers that have gone for this will notice that you've got 2 panels that are exactly the same. So you've got a cross here, which is going to be your lining, and then another cross here, which is going to be the outer. If you're sneaky and you have an extra piece of fabric, you can potentially make yourself 2 boxes out of this if you have an additional piece of fabric. So the first thing I would do with this is actually give it a bit of an iron and press any of the creases out from when it got to you, because obviously we have to fold it to get it through the post.
That's a good point.
And also just make sure you check your fabric, because the needle for your kit is usually kind of held into your fabric somewhere. Okay. So once you've got all of those things, we are going to have a look at the flosses. You've got 4, 5, 6 different flosses in here. Some of you got this darker purple, some of you got black in there, and it's entirely up to you if you want to swap those out or move them around. If you've got other threads, absolutely can. I know we've got a little kit on the show, which is the hoop the same size as this, and then a whole rainbow of different threads. So if you want to do this in a different colour, absolutely you can. If you've got threads at home, flosses at home, then away you go. So the first thing we're going to do is take some of the floss that we're going to use in here, and as you can see on the stitching in this sample that Hayley's got, the stitches are quite small, they're quite delicate. So to get that, we're actually going to start splitting some of the threads down. So there's the little box, and you can see on here you've got some really kind of fine, delicate little stitches on there, and the way that that's done is just by splitting those threads down. The amount that I pulled out of that kind of skein of floss there was, I just pulled it once. Now if you're very careful and you pull it quite gently, what you'll find is it will come out from that skein without disturbing those 2 paper bands. And then I've kind of used 2 lengths. Okay. And I think that's kind of enough if you're starting off, especially with a stitch that is a little bit more complex, like a bullion knot, because you can do lots of wrapping, lots of winding, and you don't want a huge, great long piece running away with you. Okay. So I'm going to thread up my needle, and then we will crack on. Okay. The other set of 3, you're just going to pop to one side, and then you can use that ready for your next piece. So once we've got 3 strands of our floss on our needle, we are ready to go. Now I'm going to put this in a hoop just to hold it still for the camera. It's not essential that you have a hoop for this, it's just helpful for the camera if we do. So we are going to go for this one here. Okay. So to get to start this off, now there are lots of lovely techniques of kind of hiding your knots and things, but in the interest of getting going and getting started off, we're just going to go with a scruffy knot. I've just kind of wrapped it around my finger, and then I'm just going to roll it back and forth, roll it off my finger, and then just tighten it up with a fingernail, and that's going to give me not an attractive but a practical knot. So we are going to start with our butterfly, and we are going to be doing bullion knots. So we're going to come from the body end, pick one of those grey lines. One other thing I do need to mention as well is don't cut your fabric. You absolutely don't want to do that. You want to do all your embroidery while it's one solid piece. So that's why we're doing kind of the lessons in this order, that we're stitching everything on first, and then we're going to assemble the box. Okay. So we've got it in a hoop just for camera purposes, but you don't have to. If you do want little hoops, we do have them on the show. So we're going to go from the back up to the front. We've come up there on what you would call the shoulder of the butterfly then, and then we're going to come back down at the end of that line right on the tip, but we're not going to pull all of this through. Okay. We are going to leave ourselves a kind of medium-sized loop. Okay, and then we're going to come back up where we first started on the shoulder of that butterfly. Okay. And then we're going to pop it up, but we're not going to bring it all of the way through. All right. We're just going to bring a little bit of that floss through, because what we want to do now is just pull this back a little bit, so we've made our loop a little bit larger, and then we're going to start wrapping that thread that made that little kind of C shape. We're going to start wrapping that. Okay. So each turn that we put on is roughly equivalent to 0.5 millimetre. Okay. So if we look at that first grey line that we're trying to cover in here, we just get a little pointy needle here. So this one here, we're probably looking at roughly about 1 centimetre. Okay. So I'd probably say about 20 turns. Okay. Is going to do that. Not all at once. Do about 6 or 8, and then what we're going to do, I'm going to try and get my fingers out the way so I can see what I'm doing here, and then we're going to slide it down and off the bottom of that eye. Now you need to keep your fingers kind of held on that stitch that you're taking off, just so you keep the tension on it. You're holding that spiral of thread that slides down there. Okay. Slide it off, and when you get to the stage where you've got enough on there, you're going to use, I'm right-handed, so I'm going to use my left hand just to keep the tension on there, and I'm going to hold it with my kind of index finger, and then with my forefinger I'm going to just slide the rest of that down. Keep sliding, keep sliding, keep sliding until my needle comes completely out of that spiral. We're going to then pull. We're going to do this 2 or 3 times, so don't worry if you're lost. We're going to keep pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling, and then all of a sudden it'll start taking up that excess thread. This at the minute is a little bit baggy and all over the place, so to rectify that, if you just kind of slide it up and down a couple of times, that should get rid of any kind of bagginess. Okay. And then you just pull it tighter and tighter and tighter, and you've created your first bullion knot. And while it's like that, you can still kind of, move it up and down a little bit and just tease it and adjust it so that when you pull it tight, you get a nice kind of straight effect on it, and it's a little bit more even. Okay. So once you've completed that knot, what you're going to do is you're going to go back down the same hole at the end of that knot. So obviously we started beside the shoulder, and then we went down at the tip. We came back up through the shoulder. We're going to go back down through the tip. Okay. And that is our first bullion knot. So what I'll do, I will repeat I'll do the same thing again. I won't do it right next to it because I think it'll be easier to see if it's a little bit further away. Okay. Now, if I was going to continue sewing these, then on the back, you'll just have that one straight line. And if you are going to start kind of moving about, it's definitely worth tucking your thread under those stitches that you've created.
Kind of weaving it back to the start
point. Because then you're not going to have kind of big spans coming across. Right. So we're going to do the same again. We're going to start on the opposite shoulder. Okay. We're going to come up, and then you're going to come back down on the tip, and we're going to leave a nice big loop. We'll leave a bigger loop this time. Right, so we're going to come back up and just make sure you get the eye of the needle out and just as little thread as possible. Okay, yeah. Okay, so out, eye of the needle's out, and there's as little thread as possible there. Okay. Now, one of the other things I do want to show, I'm just going to quickly flip this over so you can see, is I have, you want enough thread here, single thread here, that you've got plenty to wrap, and you want as little kind of doubled over thread as possible, because really when you pull it all through, you don't want it to be wrapped around that double thread for long, and you want it all to go on that single thread, because if you've got too much double thread, you'll just end up kind of taffling yourself up and getting a knot that you won't be able to get off the needle. So we're going to go again. We're going to I'm going to pull this through a little bit more. Now, the more you pull this through, the baggier your stitch will become. So we're going to wrap it round, and we're going to do another 20. So I'm going to do 3 or 4 at a time and just slide them down, and then slide them down, and then slide them down. Keep going. Then we're going to slide them all off that needle. You just see me sliding them down there, and then keep sliding, and then when we're about to take the last one off, I'm going to move it so I can keep the tension on from this side, and then just pull that through and keep, you see, it's difficult because I've got to keep my thumbnail on that point there where that tension is, because that's what's going to stop it from unraveling and becoming baggy. So you just keep pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling, and then I've got my thumb in this gap here as well, just keeping that straight so it doesn't get itself knotted up while I'm pulling, and you just keep pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling until you get it so it's standing up like that, and then just again keep that tension on, pull it flat, and that's your second one. And then to complete it, you're going back in through that same point where you started to complete your second knot. So what we might do now is for those ones who want to do something that's a tiny step on, what I think we'll do is we'll continue with the bullion knot, and I will do another 2 or 3 of these because it's a really brilliant one for texture. So I'm going to do a couple more, but just for those who are a little bit more advanced and want to try something slightly different, I'm going to take 2 strands in the red, and I've got 1 of these little purple ones. And if you're going to create almost your own blended or variegated thread, this is a really nice way to do it. So let me just grab a needle, and I'm taking those 2 red bits and the 1 purple bit and threading them all through the same needle, and then just giving it a couple of little strokes with my fingernail just to kind of line everything up together. Then we're going to put another little scruffy knot in the bottom here. As long as the knots aren't too big and lumpy, then you'll get away with leaving them. It's when they're kind of really solid you'll struggle. So I'm going to come into the next one along. We're going to start in the same position. We're going to start from the centre and come up from there. And we're just going to do exactly the same bullion knot again. The only difference this time is I've made my own kind of combined thread. And by adding and changing 1 strand at a time, it will kind of graduate your colours as you go. So if you want to take that next step on, this is a nice way to do it. So we're going to go up, we're going to go back down. So start beside the body, go out towards that outer edge, and then we're going to come back down. Oh, hang on, I've still got, just bear with, I've still got my red one attached, so I want to tie that off. So we showed you this the last time when we did the Stittionary one, but I definitely think it's worth showing again. So we've gone under there, we've got a little loop, and I'm going to cut off this thread, and then instead of just trying to tie a knot to that piece of thread, I'm actually just splitting these out. So I've got 1 thread on the other side, and then tying them in a double knot this way. And this will do 2 things. Give you a much more solid anchor point, and 2, it will make you a much flatter knot on the back. So we'll just trim that away. So that's secured and that's out of the way, because when you're pulling this amount of thread back and forth and you're kind of having to hold the tension on the needle and everything else, you don't really want bits on the back that are going to get tangled up in it. So there's my loop. We're going to come back up in that same position on the front and bring the needle through, bring the eye of the needle through, and then just as little as we possibly can of that thread. So we've just got a tiny, tiny bit there. And then we are going to wrap. So this one's a little bit longer. So I'd probably say about 25 roughly we're going to need on this. So hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and slide them down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I hope somebody's counting, because I'm terrible at counting. 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 25. Okay, so then we're going to take those and we're going to, holding onto the needle at the top, just with the thumb and forefinger there, just to make sure they don't go anywhere. We're just going to slide these down, and then I can slide a bit more of that needle through as we go to keep the tension on those threads, and slide. And then once they're all onto the thread, we're going to pull the needle, take away all of that excess floss, let it slide through until we get it upright. Once it's upright, you can kind of let go of it a little bit, because you'll be able to kind of pull it flat as you go. See, I'm a little bit baggy on this end, so what we're going to do is just move it back and forth, and you can use the needle to do this if you want, just to, can you see, it's just kind of moving in those bits at the bottom there that were a little bit baggy, and just by sliding it back and forth you can even some of those baggy bits out. See, I've got a baggy bit down the bottom here, there we go. And then once you're happy with it, it's difficult to do this with keeping the tension but keeping my fingers out of the way, and then just pull that tight, and can you see you've got your next one in there. And because I've used two colours, can you see you get the odd flecks of the purple running through there, so it's a really nice way to graduate your colours down. Now if yours, I've probably done a couple too many on there, because can you see how this one's kind of wiggling about a bit and is kind of bowing out a little bit. If yours is doing that and you think yours is a little bit long, then rather than take it out, if you just pop a little stitch up with the same thread about halfway down, and then pop it back down, go over the top of your stitch and back down the same hole, it will disappear into it and allow you to pin that in place and keep it straight. Okay. So it's just a couching, what's called a couching stitch, but that will just help you to keep your bullion knots straight. Do you know what, we're going to do one more, because I've got 2 more stitches to do still, but I think this, if you can crack this one, this is it's the most difficult stitch in the whole thing, and if we get this one out of the way, then you've got the lot sorted, and it's always one I can go back over next week if anybody emails in and they're struggling. So okay. One more time, we've come up in the middle, and then we're going to go down on that outer edge, leaving it a loop, and then we're going to come back up in the same place that we started, and just bring through the eye of the needle and as little floss as you possibly can, so just like that. And then we're going to start wrapping again. So we're going to, now when you wrap, I didn't actually say this, you probably saw it, but when you wrap from this end of the thread, the end of the thread that's nearest the needle that you've brought up, because if you start wrapping in the middle or start wrapping at the other end, you're going to end up with really, really baggy bits. So wrap at this end, so there's where we went down, that's where we've come up, so it's this piece of thread, the one that's anchored, the one that you can kind of pull against and it's not going anywhere. If you try and wrap with this side that's moving about, that's when you're going to start to have problems. So we'll do it one more time, and I need 25, sorry. 10, 15, 20, and again just scooching them down as we go. 25, sliding them down, that's it, they're all the way down. So we're going to pull out through all of that excess, lay it out flat, and then again if there's any of that excess there that you need to work up or work out, then just slide it back and forward a little bit. There you go. Slide it up and down just a little bit to even those out, and that will allow you to kind of clear off any baggy bits that you've got, and then pull it tight and down you go. So if you've put a few too many in and yours is kind of a little bit raised up off your fabric, if I just swizzle that around you might see, then if you, on the same line as the line that you were following, if you come up, loop over the top, and then go back down in that same hole, you can put a little couching stitch in there that will disappear because it's the same colour as the threads that you've already used, and that will hide your stitches for you. So let me just get rid of this thread, and then we will go back and do another one. So if you want kind of extra help with that bullion knot, there are diagrams in here, and also on the Craft Yourself Silly YouTube channel there are more videos on how to do this as well. So there's plenty of help, and if anybody is stuck, let us know. We'll do it one more time next week if anybody needs to see it. So I've got some green on the go. Let me just get rid of this one, and we'll go for, we're going to go a much more straightforward one now, and we are going to do chain stitch. So for these little kind of wheat sheaf ones is the one that we are going to go for. And it's essentially, it's a chain stitch. So we are going to chain down the center and then in from each side, because the chain stitch is a directional stitch, and we'll show this when we come down the middle one. Right, so coming up from the back, and then we're making a loop and we're coming back down in exactly that same hole. And we're keeping a loop. Now the thing that's I think people find most difficult with a chain stitch is getting it nice and straight, and that's because the normal error with chain stitch is people let their floss flip over on them, and that's what will give you kind of a wonky looking chain stitch. So as long as you keep that floss nice and flat as you go, and it is worth, you know, making the chains much bigger than you need them to stop that happening. So I'm going to come up in the middle of that loop. So obviously you see I've made a huge loop there, and I've come back up with just a little bit further down, maybe a ½ centimetre further down, and I've come up in the middle of that loop. And then when I pull this tight, the thread in the loop is going to stop the thread on either side pulling right the way down, and that's created our first chain stitch. Now you are going to be working from the top to the bottom. And that's because with a chain stitch, you can see on this one here, those two pieces are coming out of the same hole at the top there. So it's narrower there and it's wider at the bottom. And that's the look that we're going for. We're going for narrower at the top, wider at the bottom. So to do the next chain, I'm coming back in through the same one. And we're going to come down, leave a loop, and again just using my finger there and my thumb just to make sure it's not twisted at all, because we want to keep that nice and flat. About ½ centimetre down. So yeah, we're working from top to bottom. I mean, these are like little sprigs of flowers, and we're going to add the flowers in a second, and just making that little chain stitch is all we need to do. So we were going always back in the previous stitch, we're coming through to the back, leaving a loop, making sure it's not twisted, and then coming back up in between. You just split those out so you can see. No, see they are twisted. There you go. Coming back up in between there. And then pulling it tight. And that is essentially your chain stitch. You're going to do this exactly the same thing coming in from each side. Now, as you can see, this is directional. So when you do these kind of offshoot branch bits, you want to start here and then sew in, stop, and then start from the other side and sew in, because that's directional. If you just continue to do them, so do you know what? I'll come up this one as if I was kind of coming down from one side and then coming back up the other. I would do your middle piece first and then go back and do your branches. Right, so if I were doing my branches and I was coming away from the centre rather than towards the centre, because obviously we're telling you to always work towards the centre, what you'll end up with is you'll end up with that rounded edge on the outer edge. And we want them to be nice pointy leaves on the outside and round bits at the bottom. So you're only going to need about 3 stitches on each of these. 2 and then 1 more. But you'll see the difference then. Do you know what? I'll do the one above it in the opposite direction, and then you'll be able to see the difference. So this one is the way you do not want to be going, because you'll end up with the rounded edges at the top. But it does present an important thing of how to finish off a chain stitch, because once you get going, it's all well and good, but then how do you stop? So to finish off a chain stitch, obviously your last stitch there, you've got the loop around it, and then you've got the thread coming out from the centre of it. All you're going to do is go down the same hole that you've just come up with, and that will lock that last stitch in place, so that's not going to go anywhere. Now the one thing you do have to be a little bit careful with is when you pull that back down, that you don't pull too hard, because if you pull too hard, because you've gone up and down the same hole, if you pull too hard they'll both pop through. Right. And then you'll end up losing your chain stitch. Okay. So can you see that? I mean, it's not a huge difference, and a man going past on a bike would never know. So if you just want to kind of, you know, smash down one side and up the other, as long as it's getting done, I'm not really. I'm giving you best case scenario. And if you want to just crash through it, then that's also fine by me. But yeah, we want you to work from the outside edges through into the middle here. If you go the opposite direction, then that's what it's going to look like. So I'm just going to quickly work from the inside in so you can see the difference. It's only 3 stitches on each side, so these don't take long to do at all. But what I would recommend you do is stitch through some of the stitches on the back to kind of travel your thread to where you need it to be. In the same way as we did with the bullion. Yes, rather than just jump it straight across, because you're less likely to get it caught on things and tangled up in things when we're working later on. So I've come down from that point and I'm working towards the centre. Now what I want to do is just move my, see, I've just got my little finger in there and I'm just moving those threads out of the way a little bit so I can get back up into the centre. Take that loop round, because I don't necessarily want to overlap the threads that I've got. I just want them to sit next to them, so then I can pop it back down there. And there's not a huge difference between the two there. So you can see there's the one coming down the centre. This top one we've done coming in from the outer edge, and then this bottom one we've come out from the middle towards that edge. You just get a slightly more rounded branch, and that you can see that the stitches are travelling in a different direction. So I would recommend that you went this way. If you're not that bothered and you're just kind of happy to be stitching, then you can do those branches all in one go if you wish. So it's entirely up to you. Okay, we're going to go one more. And what colour thread? Let's go with the purple one again, because I've got a needle thread for that. And this is your old favourite. This is your French knot. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one out in this space, just so you can see what I'm doing, and then we'll start putting some into here. So I've got my knots on the back of this thread. I've got my thread nice and tight, and at the point where I came through there, that's where I'm going to start wrapping. And then we're going to go back down in more or less the same hole that I came up in. Okay. Not exactly the same hole, just pretty close. And then we're keeping the tension on this one. I'm just going to pull it through. So I'm just going to keep my tension on there and pull this through from the back. Now, if you've got it too tight, which I have a little bit there, you'll find that you won't get the eye of the needle through. So it might be worth just loosening that off a little bit. And then you'll pull it through. Just remember to keep this one taut until right the very last minute, and that will make your French knot. So we'll do it again just to make sure. So we're going to come up from the back, and we're going to do 3 wraps, and we're going to wrap it as close to the point that we came up as we possibly can, just keeping a nice tension on that thread. 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to upend the needle, slide that knot down a little bit and pop it back through, but not in the same hole. Oops, there we go, not in the same hole, and keep the tension on that thread. and then pull your needle through. There you go, and then keeping that tension on while you pull the majority of it through, and then just at the last minute you're going to let go, and it's going to create that French knot. The biggest mistake that people make with French knots, well, there's two actually. One is, let me just pop this back up. One is wrapping it somewhere over here.
Okay.
Nowhere near the end of the where you've come through, because when you start to put that back through, that's what you end up with. You end up with kind of baggy, scraggly mess. So that's kind of key thing number one, is keep the tension on and wrap it as close to that needle as you can get it. And then the second thing is people go back through the same hole. And what happens when you go back through the same hole, especially if you've got a wider weave fabric, is when you pull that tight, the whole knot just pops through. Just make sure, the other thing is, make sure you keep that tension on there. And it doesn't have to be dead tight, it just has to stop it running away. That's all we're after, stopping it running away and stopping it kind of unravelling and getting all taffled up. And just pull, and there you go.
Like
and you can use
coils.
That same technique as I used earlier if you're wanting to kind of step it up a notch, where you combine the threads. So let's do a couple with that as well, and we'll actually put them into the little sprig that we've got going on over here. So we are going to go, and with this you can go on top of your chain stitch, you can go beside your chain stitch, you can go wherever you like with this.
Okay.
Just be mindful that when you pull it back through, you've got you don't come back through exactly the same hole. So this is with the kind of combined thread. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, keeping those wraps up towards the kind of thread that came through, and then back down, slightly different hole, and then keep the tension on, pull it through. A bit too much tension on there, let me loosen a bit off, there we go. And then you can see that one's just mostly red, and it's just, you can see just that little flick of purple in there. So you can really kind of play with the colours you've got, combine them up, create kind of more interest. Looks like holly now. I've created holly. I've got a Christmas one. Okay, so we're going to come up. We'll do this one more time. 1, 2, 3. Back down. Not quite the same hole, but nearly the same hole. Keeping that tension on. And one thing to be mindful on this is just make sure, see, that's the doubled over bit of my thread just going through there. Right. And I've not got a huge amount left. Okay. So after this stitch, I will kind of shuffle my thread along a little bit, because that's one of the other things that will catch you out sometimes, is just having not quite enough single thread. That's your important bit. And if we haven't got enough, then we can just move the needle up a little bit, and then that's giving me much more to play with there, loads more of that single thread. So just to recap, homework is to bullion in the butterfly, and we went through that right at the top of the hour. You also want to put a bullion in for the body, and then just a little French knot in there for the head, and that's in your black or your really, really dark purple one. And then we've got the chain stitch, which has gone up and down, so top to bottom for the stalks, and then in from either side for the leaves. Now you could even do those in just a single chain if you wanted to. It's entirely up to you. And then to decorate those, just some little French knots. So if you want to use the green like it's a stalk and leaves, that's fine. But if you have a look on the other side, we've got it where it's been set up more like a kind of
it's like a corn almost,
like an ear of corn. And you could always put a few extras in between there, so that chain stitch, you could always add a few extras in between those ones to just fill it out a little bit more if you want. So next week,
what are we going to learn next week?
We will be looking at this stitch here, which is your sometimes called a woven wheel, sometimes called a spider's web stitch. Okay. And that's what's going to create our little knots. But the lid of the box is exactly the same as well. So this one's going to be doing with the woven wheel as well. So we're going to reuse the chain stitch that we've used in this show. We're going to reuse those French knots, but we're going to be adding those woven wheels in as well. So that's next week. So your homework is to finish those 2 butterfly panels. Next week, we're going to have a look at the woven wheel and get those panels underway. And in the last week, we're going to make it into a box. Now, there is another panel on here, this little square. So if you hang on to that little square and an equivalent sized little square, we'll actually show you how to make a little pincushion